In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this shirt. If you don't want to make this shirt, this is the wrong video. Sorry. So the first thing I do is cut out the sleeves from the pattern I used. You're supposed to cut it on the fold, but I'm trying to use as little fabric as I want because I did not get enough. And I'll leave the pattern below, but you may need to adjust it depending on your arm sizes because mine are pretty long and skinny. So the top of the sleeve needs elastic, so I create an encasing for the elastic on the whole top of the sleeve, even though the whole thing doesn't need it. And I fold over the elastic so that there's no raw edges, and I make space for the elastic, and I used a 1/4 inch elastic, and then make sure to double fold it and then sew it right on the edge. And then on this part I'm just pinning it, which takes quite a while to pin it, and you have to kind of work well with the fabric and make sure it's all rounded and nice and even. So here I keep clipping, and it takes quite a while to clip it all around, and I use the elastic as a base to know how long I needed to make the encasing. And I just went around, and then at this part I show you where I sewed it, right along that line. So then I just sew down all this fabric that I had just pinned. For this pattern I made, the elastic needs to start from 6 inches from the bottom. So right here I'm marking, and that's 6 inches where I mark. And that's where the elastic needs to start, and then it goes all the way to the opposite side where again I mark at 6 inches. So you want the elastic just to be in that top part, that's why you mark it right there. Now this is kind of the most confusing part to explain, but you cut the elastic and you only want the elastic to be the top of the shirt. So you pin it in and you put it through the encasing, through the whole encasing, and then where you left your blue marks on both sides, you have to leave a little hole so you can get the bobby pin out, and then you place the elastic there and you sew it with a zigzag stitch so it stays. So then the elastic's only on the top part of each sleeve, and this takes some time, and you just have to kind of configure it out, and it ends up working out just fine. And then after you sew it down, I would just go back and sew back the fabric so it's nice and even. So then when you get the elastic in place, you put it down, and then I did a zigzag stitch on this because I want it to be, it's elastic, so it needs to be able to stretch and it needs to be durable. So then I just sewed it in place on both parts, and I just did a zigzag stitch, and I went back and forth a few times just to make sure it was secure. So for this part, you're going to make the tube top. You're going to measure across the bust at the biggest point and add about 10 inches. That's like the best way to make sure it still fits, but you're giving enough room for the elastic. And then you want to measure how tall you want the tube top to be, and then add about 2 inches for seam allowance because you need to hem it as well. And now that you got your measurements, you're going to make a square. So how long it's going to be, my bust was 35 and I added 10 inches, so that's going to be about 45 inches long. And then for the length, I ended up just letting it stay how it is because I was too lazy to change it, which it ended up being shorter than I wanted, but I didn't want to get more fabric or like add on to it, so I just left it as it is. And here you can see I'm just measuring it. So for the tube top part, you're making it shrilled, so you need elastic, so you're gonna have to hand wind your bobbins, which takes quite some time, but it's the only way to do it. There's no other way around it. And I did about 4 or 5, I think, for this shirt, and I would just recommend doing it before because otherwise you just don't want to do it. And then here I'm just hemming the tube top part, and I'm just double folding it as I go because I did not want to iron it or pin it. Then for the elastic, you're just gonna put it in like a normal bobbin and just thread it up and get ready to sew. So I've done a few shrilled tube tops, and I find the best way is just to use the top edge and start the first one there, and you want to lay the fabric flat and just keep sewing along that line. And then when you get around to the next line, just use that line you just sewed and line up it to that line and just keep sewing. And then this is just kind of repetitive. You just sew it along the whole way and just make sure the fabric is flat, and as you get more to the end, it'll start to shrill up more, as that's the point of the elastic. So you're just doing line and line of this elastic fabric, and then you have to also place the bobbin multiple times as you go. So I would just back stitch it at that part then and keep going, and here you're attaching the two ends of the tube top, and I use my serger because I have one and it's the best way to do. Otherwise you can do a zigzag stitch. Just to make sure everything's secure, I would do 2 zigzag stitches just because we're working with elastic thread and you want to make sure it's secure. And then you want to hem the bottom of the arm piece. So I just serged it and then used my sewing machine and folded it over once and sewed it, just because I wanted to have as much length as I could on the arm, as I have long arms. I'm also serging the arm pieces together, right sides together, to make it one arm piece. And if you don't have a serger, you can do a zigzag stitch as well, and just make sure they're even, and then sew up to the part where you're going to be attaching it to the shirt, and the part you've hemmed, see it right there, you want to stop. And then you're going to lay out your 2 arm pieces with your shirt, and then this is what it's going to look like. And this part I would suggest trying on the sleeves and the arm and pinning where you want it to go, because everybody is different. And here I'm just showing you, like, I had already tried it on other shirts, so I knew it needed to be about 4 inches. So I measured about 4 inches on each side and marked it there on each piece. And then I started pinning it, and then you pin the inside of it to the edge just so the sleeve is attached, but you want the elastic part to not be attached because it will go on your shoulder. And then you do this to both sides and you pin it down. This part can be kind of difficult, so I would maybe sew it once and then try it on and make sure you like it on one sleeve, and then make sure to do the same thing on the other sleeve, because it's kind of difficult just based off the pattern and the style of the shirt. And then here I try it on, I like it, so then look, I add the other sleeve and it's a shirt that I like. And then I use my extra fabric because we don't want to waste, and I make a scrunchie. I do mine 23 inches by 4 inches. That's the best way I've found. There's a million different ways to do it, and then I just serge the right pieces together, or you can zigzag, doesn't really matter. And then you get your bobby pin and you get it so you can get it in, because it's inside out. You want it right sides together, just pull it through, and then you get your elastic. I like to get my elastic 7 inches long. That's the best way I found it, so I can still wear it around my wrist and not suffocate myself. And then you pin it to one side and then you put it back in, and then you get the 2 sides together, and then you're going to zigzag stitch it. I zigzag stitch it a few times just to make sure it's secure. That's the only way that I found that it doesn't break, because some stitches are not weak. I do it a lot of times and make sure it stretches, and then cut off all the extra seams. And then some people glue it, but I like to sew it so one side is in the other, and you have a scrunchie. And then you add your scrunchie to your other scrunchies that you've made that you don't wear, but they hang here and it's beautiful. And then you go outside and you play with your dog because she's cute, and you get excited because you have a new shirt to wear.